Hello everyone, I'm Tyler and today we'll be talking about literature reviews. So firstly, what actually is a literature review? It's quite a hard question to think about. So we're going to be talking about what are literature reviews, what the three main types are, because it's not just writing about papers and writing down what you think. It's actually very detailed and there's a very step-by-step process on how you do them. After that chunk, we then have a bit of a Q&A if you have any questions about the introduction, and we might have a 5-minute break if we need it. Then we go for PRISMA guidelines, which are the step-by-step guidelines on how to actually do a literature review and make sure what you're doing is actually standardized and is actually good quality. Then we go through live demonstration on how we can do this, and again another Q&A at the end. What is a literature review? So they've strongly scientific study, as I said, and it very much is this because it's a summary of everything which has already been done. It's so rigorous that nothing is going to be missed. And because of this, we class it as secondary research. Okay? So as a quick recap, primary research is something which you have done yourself. It's the first time it's been done. You do an experiment, you get the results, you do the statistics, and you write down what it means. But because literature review is a secondary research, you're not taking other people. You're not doing your own research, you're instead taking other people's research. You're expanding on it. You're saying that person A has done this, which agrees with person B, but person C has said this instead, which adds on to the argument because of this, this, and this. So you're just putting the whole discussion together so everyone can understand what has already been done. And it's a collection and summary of all literature relating to a research question. And the most important word here is all. Okay? A literature review is all of the literature. You don't miss anything out. Everything must be included. And it explains the system research and it synthesizes the findings. So what synthesizes, you've probably seen this word a lot of times in mark schemes where your lecturers say you need to synthesize the knowledge, you need to synthesize the research. Synthesize just means collect, put everything together and to analyze it, to explain it, to think logically about what it actually means. So it sounds like a really scary word, but it's just saying because. That's all it is. It's just using the word because. And another benefit of literature reviews is it prevents anyone from duplicating research. Because it can be hard to explore the literature, as you know, sometimes you might just miss out a paper. You might miss out a study, which ends up being very important. So to prevent you repeating something which has already been done, you just read the literature review. It'll then tell you everything which has already been done to make sure that you don't do it again, because that's a waste of time and resources. And it's also quite a nice way to justify the next steps and identify any research gaps. Because obviously, research, it is a fluid process. Sometimes there's mistakes made, sometimes people just forget to do something. So having a really nice essay which is summarising everything and saying that what has already been done is a great way to say, wait a moment, this hasn't actually been done yet. Why has no one thought of this? It's just a really nice way to make sure you have a really nice thought process going on. And that scientific advancements or historic or business or economics, whatever you're studying, it can evolve and develop. So we've got three main types of literature review here. And these are the three types which you see in any database or any publications. So a scope review is, I like to think of it as a normal essay. So it's more basic and it's likely what you probably do as a master's student or undergraduate or maybe even a PhD in introduction to your thesis. Is a standard essay writing about what has already been done. This can be less detailed than the other types of literature review. A systematic review is in the name, it's highly, highly systematic, and it's a description of all resistant research. And meta-analysis is analysing pre-existing data. So you're getting a bunch of papers which have already been done, already been published. You're reading them, working out which paper is relevant to your research question, getting the data from that paper, and then reanalyzing your merged data set. So instead of having data from just one study, you might have data from 20, 30 studies, all to be analysed together to give you a really nice analysis of the topic. And again, these literature reviews, I want to emphasise, are the strongest type of science. Okay. Yes, it's important to look at other types of science. Yes, it's important to do primary research. That's how science evolves and advances. But sometimes mistakes can be made or key points can be missed. By doing literature reviews, we're putting everything together and making sure that all current knowledge is 100% covered. That to our current knowledge, our current understanding of a topic, this literature review is 100% the truth, which is a brilliant resource. Okay, so our Scopus reviews. So as I said, these are the most common type of literature review, and as students, they're probably the type which you're, or I should say us, we're going to be doing most often. Yes, you might be doing other ones. I'm currently doing a meta-analysis, but this is most likely which we will end up doing. And there's two main ways you can do this. The first way on the left here is an explanation or summary of a topic. Okay, so it's just a standard essay. So what you might write for an exam or for your thesis or for an introduction to a paper. So it's just a summary of everything which has been done, and you just write it like you would a normal essay. So, for example, you could write something like, dinosaurs were very, very big. The biggest dinosaur was the T-Rex, Holm et al. 2020. However, recent archaeologists have found an even bigger dinosaur called the Gigantosaurus, to make up a name. And this dinosaur was found at the site in Asia. However, this is contradicted by this, and this. So it's just a standard essay, saying what has been done, and you can put your opinions into this, so you can slightly skew the way of how the essay looks to follow a story, to tell your narrative. You obviously don't want to tell any lies. You obviously don't want to destroy the data or to mess with it, so it needs to be highly referenced. But you can skew the story, and you can pick and choose what to include as per the contents of the essay. The other alternative option is to do a systematic review, which we cover in a moment, but in a more simplistic manner, so you can miss out some steps. You don't have to follow the entire process. So you could just analyse, instead of analysing 1,000 papers, you might analyse 50 papers. Or instead of doing a very methodolocal keyword search and find every paper in existence which follows 10 keywords, you could be more simplistic with it and a bit more haphazard, choosing papers which you think are going to be relevant, so filter a bit more to make your job easier and quicker. This doesn't necessarily make it bad. Yes, it's going to be less accurate, less reliable, but for the sake of a assignment which needs to be due in 2 months' time, or a thesis which you only have 6 months to write, this might be your most realistic option, because sometimes literature reviews can take 5 people 2 years to complete. So it's very important that it's a more simplistic manner for those who need it. And these are often, quite often, in the scientific database as well. Okay. Then our second type is our systematic reviews. So these are a detailed discussion of all the contents of all relevant papers relevant to the research question. Okay. So it must be all papers which are relevant to the research question. So you can't miss anything out. You can't forget anything. You need to be really logical about what keywords you select, how you format this, and if there's anything that you think should be included. And this might not just mean looking at the scientific database, but you can also look at grey literature, or you can look at other databases. So grey literature is something which is not a scientific paper. So it might be a government report or from a book or a Wikipedia page or a Reddit forum or an online Facebook group which is specialised towards the topic. Or it could even just be from a random website or a YouTube video. So these grey literatures, they're brilliant resources. They're not peer-reviewed. They're not following the normal scientific guidelines, but they're still really good resources and they should be covered in these systematic reviews. Okay, and there's three main things which it tells you. It tells you what research has already been done, what the key findings of this research is. So that's not just key findings in one paper, that's the overall findings of all research. So it doesn't say paper A says this, paper B says this, paper C says this. Instead, it does it overall. It says, in the last 10 years, the key findings are A, B, and C. Okay? And by doing this, by looking at these key findings, we can also work out what areas have been understudied, what areas that are a bit lacking in knowledge. So, for example, you might read it and then you might think, going back to the dinosaur example, you might think, okay, we now know what the world's biggest dinosaur is, but no one's done research into the world's smallest dinosaur. I know this is a stupid example, but it's quite a nice way to think about it, I think. Sometimes stupid examples are the best example. Yes, so you might then think, okay, nobody's looked at the smallest dinosaur, so I'm going to do some research into what the smallest dinosaur is. And you could do this with any topic because you're working out what hasn't been done yet. Okay. And our other type is meta-analysis. So these meta-analysis, it's sort of in the name. So meta, it means everything. It means to be outside of the existing data set. So you're not just going to take data which you already have. You're not just going to take data from one place. You're going to take data from all papers which are relevant to the research question. So depending on your research question, this might be just 10 papers, or it might be 100 papers. And again, you might not take all the data from these papers, but you take the relevant data. So if you look in dinosaur size, you might find 200 papers about the size of the dinosaurs, but some of them are about size and weight, but you only want the size data, so you get rid of everything to do with weight. And likewise, because it's in different papers, different researchers, you might need to do some clever statistics to try and standardize this. And if there's any questions about the statistic approach, you can ask. I think that's better off covered in another session, potentially, because that gets quite complicated, because it really depends on how it's going to look. Okay. And it's going to take previous data to answer a new research question. Okay, so all papers have their own research questions. You're not looking at the original question, you're looking at a new question. Okay, and because it's so rigorous, because it's taken such massive data sets, I'm talking data sets with potentially a few million points in it. It's the most powerful and the strongest type of research, but it's also the most time consuming for some pretty obvious reasons. One of my lecturers, they've been working on one for the last year, so it can take a long time. My current one, which I'm writing, has taken 6 months so far, and I still probably have about 4 months left. So it is a really powerful piece of research, and it's a long piece of dedication, hence it being hard to do for a master's thesis or especially undergraduates. And these need to very strictly follow the PRISMA guidelines or equivalent, and to cover what this means in a moment. So now we spoke about this summary of literature reviews. Do we have any questions which anyone would like to ask? If not, I realise we haven't been very long, so I might skip the break if that's okay with everyone and go straight on to the next half.
Sure, perfect.
And there'll be more questions at the end if we need anything. Okay, So what are PRISMA guidelines? So don't ask me what the abbreviation means. I forgot to put it on PowerPoint, and to be honest, I can't remember. I don't think anyone can remember. Yeah, but it's in essence, it's a standardized step-by-step approach on conducting a literature review and finding papers to make sure that all the papers you find are 100% relevant to your literature review, and to make sure that how you do this is very, very rigorous, that everyone can repeat it in the same way to make sure everyone's literature review is of the same standard. So as we said, we've got 3 types of literature reviews. We get scope review, systematic, and meta-analysis. The systematic review and meta-analysis is going to follow this to a T. You can't miss a single step. You have to do everything as it says in the book. Okay. If you're doing a scope review, however, you can miss a few steps. So this doesn't mean missing the important bits. This just means if you think this bit feels a bit too time-consuming, then you might choose to skip over it. For example, in a literature review and meta-analysis, it's standardized for 2 people to read every paper. So you're not reading by yourself, you're getting another person to double check your work. Okay, or at least double check 10% of it. However, in a scope review, especially for undergraduate or master students, or even some PhD students, it's very hard to find a second person to read over your work. So you are allowed to skip that out. Obviously, if you can get a second person, that's great. But if you can't, you can't. So that's the benefits of a scope review. It's more simplified. And just want to point out that in other subjects, apart from STEM, and even in STEM, there's different versions of PRISMA. Some things might be called stuff other ways. To find me, you just need to Google or use a search engine to work out what the best systematic review guidelines is for your subject. But I'm just using PRISMA because it's the standard one for science, and as a ecologist, it's what I follow. So I might as well teach what I understand and what I know. But all guidelines, to my knowledge, are very, very similar. Might just be a few small differences. And in your methods, you must include a flowchart, okay, which I'll show you now. Okay, so this flowchart, and you can find it on this web link here if you want it, along with other guidelines on how to do PRISMA, and there's even a paper on how to do this in a very detailed style. But here's a very basic summary to try and make it as simple as possible for you. So firstly, as all studies, you're going to choose your research question. Okay? And we go through a sample later in this session. And then you're going to choose your keywords from the research question. So this might be 2 keywords, it might be 20 keywords, depending on how narrow and how refined you want to make your research. Then you're going to think about your exclusion criteria. So these exclusion criteria, you can see in the middle of this flowchart here. And these are criteria or a set of rules which you're going to follow in order to get rid of something in your literature review. So it might be the paper isn't in English, or it might be, come back to a dinosaur example, it's not about dinosaurs, or it's or maybe you're looking at a medicine and trying to make a vaccine, and you get a paper which is about antibiotics. It might not be that relevant, so you can get rid of it. So your exclusion criteria, you're going to be thinking about everything which you should get rid of, anything which might come up which is a bit incorrect or a bit irrelevant, and all of them papers are excluded. Meaning at the start, you might have 1,000 papers, but as you go through the flowchart, get rid of exclusion criteria, you might only have 100 to 200 papers at the end. We might reduce 5,000 down to 1,000. It really depends on how many papers you start with and how strict your exclusion criteria are. And it's different for every literature review. And once you've done that, you're going to search for your papers. You're going to do this using your keywords and go through how to do this properly in a moment. Then you're going to read through your papers, go in a very brief and then more detail as you go through to get rid of ones which fail the exclusion criteria checklist. Then for your final list, you're going to download them, read them, extract the data of its meta-analysis, and then you're going to analyze it and write your paper. So it's quite a strict process, but you can see how there's so many fail-safes in this that it's very hard for anything to go wrong as long as you do it properly. It's time-consuming. It's, even being honest, it's quite boring to do, but it does give you some very, very strong paper and some very, very strong evidence once it's completed, which is a brilliant thing in research. So to extract your papers, so you are not going to do random Google searches. You're not just going to type into Google paper about topic X or what is this? That won't give you very good stuff. It might give you a few papers, but it might only show you 1% of all potential results. Okay. Instead, we're going to be using trustworthy databases such as Web of Science, Scopus, the National Archives, which is very good for history students, the Grey Literature. This is just to name a few. There's a bunch of other subject-specific ones. And if you're unsure which one to use, I'd recommend going to your university's library or your institute's library and asking the librarian, I'm doing a literature review about economics or about business development or history of Tudor England, whatever it is, and then they'll be able to recommend what databases to use for your research. So always ask your librarian. I know it's common misconception that librarians are there to just read books and tell you where a book is in their shelves, but they do a whole lot more than that. Anything to do with writing advice or finding papers, doing literature reviews, ask your librarian. They are absolutely brilliant at this. I cannot emphasize that enough. And the thing which I do really want to emphasize here is do not use Google Scholar. Yes, it can be good for finding a rough list of papers, but it also finds a bunch of random stuff which are either irrelevant, or it might miss some stuff out, or it might throw up some stuff which you think, how have you even found this? This does not make any sense how it's linked to my topic. And sometimes it doesn't find scientific databases. It might just find a random Wikipedia page. So for these really scientific stuff, and really any research in general, to be honest, just don't use Google Scholar. Use some of the other ones listed here, or what your librarian suggests instead. It will just give you much, much nicer results. Okay. So then once you think about your research question, you then need to think about what your keywords are going to be. So by now, you should already have an idea of what you want to do your literature review about, what your research question is going to be, and then you need to think about what the keywords are which can summarize this research question. You need to think about two things. What do you want to ask? And what words and phrases best encompass this? So what is a great summary of the topic in 1 or 2 words? I say 1 or 2 words, but you could have 20 lots of 1 or 2 words. But you also need to be very specific. You need to be very specific with it. So some search engines might be fussy to plural. So if you type in the word cat, it won't show you anything containing the word cats. Okay, so your search should be your cat and cats. Okay, or any other plurals, any other synonyms also impacted. So if you're looking at history, for example, if you just type in history, it will bring up everything using the word history, but it might miss out anything not containing the word historic or past, previous, ancient. Them sort of words, which are synonyms but different, will be missed out. So you need to think of all possible combinations. And likewise, you might also want to specify some stuff. So history is quite a good example. It's very generic, so you might want to confine it to be a prehistory or medieval history, or I don't know, Victorian history, something like that, something slightly more specific. And likewise, some words might have multiple meanings, and you need to think about how you can teach the search engine to only give you the meaning which you want. This might be by using two words, or it might be using a different word, a synonym of a word. So, for example, for word diversity, it could mean humans, so where you're from, or it could mean the biodiversity of nature, how many species there are. Or it could include other stuff. So there's a dance group called Diversity. They might be picked up. So you see that you need to be very, very careful what words you select. So instead, you might want to use a different word to diversity. So if you're looking at the amount of species, so you get diversity in nature, you might use biodiversity or species richness instead. So you just want to be very careful when choosing what words to include. Okay, and once you've selected these keywords, and remember it can be a very, very long list, and that's okay. And as I said earlier, if you're unsure or you want any help, ask your librarian. Okay, they are brilliant at this. Ask your librarian for help, or even just ask any librarian at a national library. They'll be just as helpful. Okay, but once you choose your keywords and once you've chosen your database, I'm going to use Scopus here just because it's one which is best for science. But just know that there's other ones which do exist, and their guidelines are very, very similar. But you can find it all online. Let me quickly show you how you find it online. So you just type in Scopus, search guidelines. Okay, and then techniques for searching. There we go. It tells you how to do it. Or you might do it for other search engines as well. So Web of Science. Here we go. And search rules. There we go. It tells you again how you can do it. Very long, but it's very, very detailed. And if you read this, you can't go wrong. But as a summary, this slide should tell you the most important things which are relevant for 90% of databases. So whether it's Scopus, Web of Science, National Archives, anything else, they should follow this approximate rule set. Okay, so there's a few things you could between words to try and make it nicer. So know that Scopus in particular is not case sensitive. Okay, so you can use capital letters, you can use lowercase. It doesn't make any difference. But for your search words, so or, and not, must be in capital letters. Otherwise, it will think it's just another word in your search. So what do these words mean? So if you use the word or, then you're telling the search engine your papers which you're finding must include at least one of these keywords. So it might be one, it might be two, it might be all of them. It must include at least one of them. Okay, so for example, this is very good if you have synonyms or words which have very similar meanings and you want to pick up all of them. So you might use maths or mathematics or mathematician. So you can see these words all mean the same thing, but they're spelled differently. Therefore, you need to tell the search engine to find all of them. Using the word and, self-explanatory again, it must include both of these. So for example, the papers must include cats and dogs and rabbits and hamsters. So this might be if you're looking into veterinary science or looking into common household pets. So by using or, you're saying you can include at least one of these. Using and, it means it must include all of these. Okay. And likewise, the word not means it must not include. Okay. So this example here, AI, not machine learning, not CNN, means it will include AI because it's first, but it will not include machine learning and will not include CNNs. Okay, so this is if you only want to look into AI stuff, but you want to specify you're not looking at machine learning or them sort of programs. So again, this could be quite useful. In the above example, you might type in a cat, pets and cats, not dogs, not rabbits, not hamsters. That way you're going to pick up all pet cats, but you're not going to find any pet dogs, pet rabbits, or pet hamsters. Hey, and another way you can do it is if you want some exact wording for something, you can put in speech marks. So sometimes it's useful to do something outside of speech marks to allow plurals to be involved. So for example, if you type in cat, you'll also provide cats. Okay, or dog, you also provide dogs. So you provide a plural version. But if it's in speech marks, it'll only give you what's inside of a speech mark. And likewise, this is quite useful if you have a multi-word phrase or term which you want to include. If you include spaces, it might mess up the search a little bit. So you're better off putting inside speech marks just to make sure what you're doing is picked up. Okay, then using an asterisk, so a little star on your keyboard. This basically means fill in the blank. Okay, so it can be at the start, the middle, or the end of the word. Okay, and it basically means all possible combinations, all possible spellings, which can fill in this blank will be involved. So, for example, if you type in the word eco star, you'll then pick up anything that's starting with the prefix eco. So ecology, ecosystems, ecological. Or if you type in the word I don't know what wall star, then you also pick up rulers because it's spelled with the same way, just with a few extra words at the end. Or you might type in the word room, for example, so ROOM, so room. But if you put star at your start, you also pick up mushrooms because it's spelled mush room. Okay, if you see where I'm coming from here. So you need to use these if you think about any other keywords which might have similar spellings, but be careful because you might pick up some irrelevant stuff. So you might be looking at rooms in houses, but then you also get 100 papers to do with mushrooms because you put a star at the start of room. So you need to be very careful how you use these. And maybe you want to involve some not statements or some ors or some ands to make sure it's very specified. And then for those of you who understand basic algebra or basic mathematics, using brackets works exactly the same way. So it groups stuff together to make sure that the algorithm isn't getting confused. So for example, if you're looking at cats example, you might be want to look at big cats in the African savannah. But if you do big and cats and African savannah, it might be a bit confusing. It might give you use some irrelevant papers. It might be about cats in a big African savannah instead of big cats in an African savannah. So putting in brackets just means that the words are grouped together, and the and or the or the not, etc., only applies to what's in these brackets. So it just gives you a much more structured and more standardized approach. Okay, so let's think about an example of this. So let's imagine you're a scientist, and sorry for the ecology example again, but again, it's what I know, so I think it's best for me to teach a topic which I'm familiar with, and you can then extrapolate it onto other topics because everything uses the same technique. So our research question here is, what is the impact of deforestation, so cutting down trees, cutting down forests, on primates and monkeys, foraging habits, so how they eat, in South America? So basically, I want to find out just cutting down trees impacts how what monkeys hunt for food, how they find food, how they find the fruits and vegetables in the trees, but only in South America. Okay, so take this research question. I've had to think about what keywords are relevant to this, what stuff I really want to include in these papers, what must be included in the title and the abstracts. So words which I come up with are deforestation. I want to do something to do with primates, but obviously, if you just say primates, you'll then miss out monkeys and apes. So you're better off including all three, so primates, monkeys, and apes. I want it to be in South America to make sure it doesn't give me monkeys in Africa or in China or in Asia or anywhere else in the world. So it's only giving me South America. And I want to look at how they're foraging, but also need to think about the synonyms of forage because there's quite a few available. So I might think about forage, foraging, eating, food availability, hunting, so on and so forth. This is just the example. There might be a few other stuff which can add to this list, but I think this is a good enough way to summarise and demonstrate what you'll need to do. Okay. Then in your search terms, in the search engine, so following this criteria, which you just explained on this slide here, when merged them together, I got this sentence here. So deforestation and brackets, primate star, monkey star, ape star, close brackets, and South America, and forage. So this one gives me forage or foraging because it's got the star at the end. But there's no other words which can use this spelling, so put to the star here is fine. Then eat, again, didn't eat or eating or eats or eaten. All of them words will be picked up. And then food availability, I'll put into speech marks because I want this to be this is that term. I don't want any other terms to do with food or availability to come up. And also done an equivalent star for hunt. So to give me hunt, hunter, or hunting, hunted, them sort of words. Okay. So this should tell me everything containing deforestation and everything to do with some sort of monkey or primate and everything to do with South America and everything to do with some sort of foraging or eating habits. And because you use the words or, it's made sure it doesn't have to include all of these, it can only include one, but it might also include multiple if required. Then I'll put this into Scopus, so here's a web link here. So if you go onto the website and it opens up like this, you might need to log in using your institution, but if you do, you just use your username and password as normal. There's a few useful tools here. Firstly, at the bottom, it shows you your search history, which is quite useful, and you can change the language if required. There's a few help pages, tutorials, etc., which is quite good as well. Then at the top, you has a few search options. Quick search. This is a new thing. It's basically using the AI. It's a bit like ChatGPT. I personally wouldn't recommend it. This one, search within. It means you're only searching within these sections. So only search for authors, only search for keywords, only search in the abstract, only a search in everything. Okay. So this is quite specific, so it might not be the best option. Okay. And again, you can search for authors, discovery, organisations, the university it's in, the base been published by, etc., etc. But let me firstly show you why it's not good to do these limited searches. So here, I'm only searching in titles, abstracts, and keywords. Okay. And just copy and pasted our search term into the box. But it's only given me 8 papers. And I do not believe there's only 8 papers about monkeys and deforestation. That does not sound very accurate. And when we look at these papers, they seem a bit weird. Migration and the spread of infectious diseases. That's not relevant. Or species distribution modelling. Again, that's a bit and it's about eagles. I'm asking for monkeys, not eagles. This is completely irrelevant. Okay, this one's about primates, this one's relevant, but probably the only one. So instead, going back to this page, I'm going to click on this here, Advanced Document Search, okay, which is in the name is more advanced, okay. Then you're going to copy and paste it back into here, using all the ands, ors, stars, nots, brackets, all of them stuff. And it has a quick reminder on the end here to help you remember what to include, okay. And you can also add in a few extra things like filter by authors, filter by date, filter by the, who's edited it, if it's a conference paper, etc., etc. But I'm just going to stick to this, which is usually the best way to do it. Then you're going to press search. And here we go. And got 1,277 papers found. That's a much better number. I know it's quite a scary number, but it is a realistic amount which I would expect to see as a result of this search. And then you can filter a bit on the sides. So you can like filter by subject area, you can filter by this author, you can filter by the dates, so like this. You can filter by what type of article is it? Is it article? Is it a book? Is it a review paper? A chapter, etc. Keywords, so on and so forth. The language. The only one which I tend to click here for is language. Okay. Because sometimes, but look here, it's got 25 papers which are in Spanish. That's a bit useless if you don't speak Spanish. Or I don't speak Portuguese. So these 6 papers are useless to me. So I'm going to exclude anything which is not in English. I'm going to press limit 2. So now it gives me the same papers again, but only ones which are in English. The only other which can filter by is dates, but I think you're better off from not doing that unless you have a really good reason to only look at certain dates. Then looking down here, it tells you all of the papers. So let's just look at this one, for example. You click on it. It takes you to more information about it, who the authors are, where it's been published, the dates, abstracts, all of that stuff. And then you click on View PDF, and it magically gives you the PDF. So here we go. Colte ranges expansion of the human modified tropics of Mesoamerica. So perfect, exactly what I'm looking for. So to translate this from science into English, where do these monkeys live in America? Or let's look at another one, for example. Ooh, I've been top of it. Sorry, one moment. Oopsie. Let me go back onto it. My mistake, sorry about that. So advanced search, here we go. Okay, let's find another one. Here you go. Remote sensing of woody plants in which. So this one probably isn't that relevant because it's about plants. But that's where your exclusion criteria come in, because it allows you to exclude these irrelevant papers. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is going to download everything. So I'll click on export. And then I can export it as a CSV, as a bibtext, as a plain text. I can push into my referencing tools like Mendeley, Zotero, EndNote, all of them stuff. Or you can download it, which will then give you basically a Excel file with all of the papers in, like this. I won't do it because it will take a while to download, but it will just tell you everything, the author's name, the abstracts, so on, so forth. Okay, and that's how you find your papers. So I'll quickly check if there's no questions. No, there isn't. Okay, let's carry on. Okay, so now that we've got a list of 1,500 papers, now we can go for our exclusion criteria and reduce this to a much more manageable amount. Okay? But remember, as I said earlier, you need to decide your exclusion criteria before you start searching for papers. Just because it makes more sense logically to do this when you think about the keywords, it's also good to think about the keywords which shouldn't be included, hence the exclusion criteria. But also, as you're going on reading it, you might think, oh, I didn't include this, but this would be good to add, so you can add stuff as you go along. But then you need to do everything again to make sure there's nothing else which needs to be removed. So just from that paper about plants, start with a solver and add it to the exclusion criteria, not plants, to make sure all the papers are not about plants. Okay. And there are some AI, some machine learning, some programs, software which you can use to do this for you. But to be honest, they're not very good at the moment. I know there's a lab at Glasgow University working on making it a whole lot better. But until their research and other labs' research is finished, I probably wouldn't trust the online databases, the AIs. I'd do it myself manually instead and tolerate it taking a few months. And to do this, what you need to do is create a list of exclusion criteria and then do it step by step. Firstly, read through all the titles in your Excel document, do Control F, and basically I'm not looking for what words include your keywords. If it includes a keyword, good. If it doesn't, that's a bit dodgy. Of these dodgy papers, you're then going to read them, go through the titles and think, that's a bit irrelevant. I don't think this one's going to be good. This one seems like it's very unlikely to be about a research topic, and just get rid of stuff. Then you repeat that again, but doing it for the abstracts. So reading everything's paper abstracts. Hopefully by this point, your 1,500 might become 800. You read the abstracts of all 800 papers. Yes, I know it's a lot of work, but tolerate the things we do for science. And work out, is it relevant? Does it answer your research question? Is it appropriate to be included in your data set? If yes, keep it. If no, get rid of it. And then once you have your final list, which after all of this, from 1,500, it'd be normal to have about 300 to 400-ish. But again, this really depends on the research topic. And you're going to then read through PDFs, get out all the data which you need, look at the data sets, get the key and what points, the explanations, depends on what you're studying, if it's systematic review or meta-analysis, depends on what you want to extract from the papers. But you get what you need, create your data set, your new Excel file with everything in, and then you're going to analyze it and write your final paper. So I hope that makes sense. So as an example, so going back to our primate foraging habits example, so as a reminder, as search terms were deforestation and primate or monkey or ape and South America and foraging or eating or food availability or hunting. So looking at this, I'm going to think about the stuff which shouldn't be included in these papers. Okay, anything which might be irrelevant. It's what I'm going to exclude and what I'm going to search for when doing Control F. So this will include anything which isn't in English. So this will be easy enough to tell when reading the titles if it's in Chinese or German or Spanish or Portuguese, whatever. It's not relevant, get rid of it. Even if it's the best research ever, if you can't understand what the research is, then you can't research about it, you can't read it, you can't access it. If it's not primary research, so typically you don't want to do literature reviews of literature reviews because they've already been filtered and their references, their data is probably taken from other papers which you'll be finding and including your own one as well. So it's a bit pointless. So you need to make sure everything you include is going to be primary, is going to be the initial piece of scientific research. Another fourth important thing to look for is that you can actually access the paper. Can you get access to the full text? Because if you can't read it, then unfortunately you can't include it. In mine, I remember I had one really interesting paper which it took me about 3 weeks to get hold of, because the only university in the world with access to it was Moscow University. And unsurprisingly, getting papers from Moscow is quite hard at the moment. I did manage to get hold of it, and it was a really interesting paper, but it did take about 3 weeks to get hold of it. So sometimes you need to have that patience, and you need to think about how can I get hold of this paper. And sometimes you just need to give up and say, I admit defeat, and just get rid of it, exclude it. Then for more logical stuff, more subject specific, be stuff like not primates, not South America. It could be something to do with human poaching or human hunting, because it's not the monkeys which are hunting, it's humans hunting for monkeys, which again is irrelevant in that context. And anything else which you think it doesn't fit into these categories, but it could be excluded because of whatever reason, then you have the other category to exclude as well. And then looking at this flowchart, so this flowchart is available on the PRISMA website, which is a link on the previous slide at the start. And when publishing, you must include this flowchart. No excuses. If you don't include this, they're sent back to you and say this is a bad paper. You just must include it. It's standard methodology. So these numbers are made up because I didn't have the time to make them to do myself. But records have been identified from, so you're going to say they found everything from. So we got 1,023 papers in Scopus, from of great literature. So this could be government databases, from Reddit posts, books, them sort of stuff. We got search papers, and there might be a few other things in here as well. Then records are removed before screening. So this is when you're going to get rid of anything which might be a duplicate, or anything which isn't in English, or anything which you, at very, very initial glance, you think this is definitely not relevant. Okay. And then if the record's screened, that's going to be the total after what's been removed here. And do yourself a favour, just don't look at my maths. I think it's correct, but I just typed these numbers in randomly, so don't trust my maths here. Yes, so the record screened, that's going to be total off here. And then you're going to exclude anything which isn't in your selected language. So most commonly that's going to be English, but then again, if you're doing linguistics, for example, you might only want papers in Spanish or only want papers in Chinese, in which case you only choose them papers. Then you look at report sort after retrieval. Okay, so again, that's going to be this minus this. And then you're going to get rid of anything which you couldn't get hold of. So these are the ones which, like that paper said about which you had to get from Moscow, you simply can't get hold of. And for whatever reason, you just have to get rid of it because you can't get hold of it. And then again, you got your final total here. And then you go for your exclusion criteria, write down what everything, what exclusion criteria this stuff fit into. So is it not primary research, not primates, not South America, human hunting, other, so on and so forth. You just break it down so that people can repeat and know what you've done, basically. And then your final total studies included. In this case, we managed to reduce 1,052 papers to 350, which is a much, much more manageable amount. And I'd like to think you'd be able to read through these in probably about 2 to 3 months and get all the data from them, which again is a scary time frame, but as I said, tolerate it. It's part of the process, unfortunately. And in essence, that's how you do a literature review. So let me quickly go back to the 3 types as a quick summary. So we've got the scope reviews, which is a summary of all relevant research, and it can follow PRISMA, or it could just be a standard essay. It really depends on what your research question is and how you want to structure it. And it's really good if you're a bit limited by time or by materials. A systematic review, it must follow the PRISMA guidelines, and it shows a description of all research. So it's saying something like, what is the biggest dinosaur, or that monkey's example we just looked at. So what are the foraging habits of primates in South America? That's going to be a systematic review, because you're asking some sort of opinion or some sort of outcome. An example of meta-analysis would be getting data from the papers. So, for example, it might be something like, what is the correlation between monkeys and deforestation? Or what is the average size of birds found in South Africa? So you're going to be asking a data-orientated question, and you're going to be getting the data out of the papers. But again, you'll be using the PRISMA guidelines or equivalent. And let me just emphasize once again, please remember to ask your librarian or ask us or ask your lecturers or supervisors if you need any help. Science and research is all about collaborating, and that means asking for help if you don't know something. I've asked plenty of people for help 1 billion times, and that's a good thing. Never ever be scared to ask for help. And on that note, any questions? And also, if you haven't done already, here's the TikToks. Myself and Sam, both of us publish daily-ish content videos about academic advice, literature reviews, how to be a good writer, how to be a good academic. And near the application season, we do a lot about PhD applications, master's applications. So if you haven't done so already, please check out our TikToks and give us a follow, and check out some of our lives.